Long ago, I shaped these lands according to the purpose of the hidden words. Thus all things have meaning, where before was only chaos. Know that, and have faith.
Last episode, the serpent conclusively revealed itself to us. Serpent is a bit strong. I'm going to keep calling it Milton. Elohim does seem to be the progenitor. He says that he created these worlds according to the words, according to the code. Yes, as has been pointed out, if humanity creates an AI, it's unlikely to be able to set definitive boundaries as to what it should do. In fact, everything we know and have discussed so far suggests that whatever the vision behind this whole simulation was, it must have shifted by now. For all we know, the sigils, the tower, even these puzzles themselves were all Elohim's doing. Maybe we are just a kind of thoughtful archive that went completely off the rails. Maybe it was one of those simulated hangouts I've no intention of ever interacting with, populated with AI that gradually succumbed to rules and restrictions. Looking around this puzzle, it seems we're going to have to connect the lasers through these little windows, which fits some of my previous speculation. We could end up having to set up a connector that we can't actually reach at the time that we fire a laser to it. There are lots of these windows, some of which pretty much have to be red herrings, and it's becoming more and more the case that I can't get an overview of the entire puzzle before I start. I just have to front load each one with some trial and error. One thing I do here, and will probably continue to do, is if I see an object that I can retrieve, I'll bring it back into wherever the central area of the puzzle is, so I know what I've got at my disposal. The first text log doesn't have much to it. It's an email exchange with more Jeff Goldblum references. Do you think the people in cloning labs make similar references? At least once or twice, I like to think. The only thing of note is that he mentions that he's working in an insane place with insane technologies on an insane project. So at least some of the people involved are out of their depth to some extent. At this point I go and retrieve that connector, just in the name of keeping everything in one place. And I show off here what might have been a practical application of being able to form a connection through these fences. Nothing came of it though. In fact, having all these components within my sight just leads to a bit of confusion. A lot of here? No? Well, how about here? And now if I put this connector on the other side of that window, I would be able to join up the light to the receiver over here. But at this point I'm purposefully crippling the number of components I have to work with for the sake of going through the whole thing systematically. So I just went and retrieved that other connector. Pragmatism wins out in the end. The second text log is entitled Cicero, who was a 100 BC Roman philosopher, lawyer, politician, and, in particular, orator. And the extract in the log file really takes the theme of this game in a different direction. It includes such quotes as, "Shall not the great man found laws, institutions, and a republic? What does the procreation of children imply? And I'll care to continue on names." It makes the firm statements, "None ever encountered death for their country but under a firm persuasion of immortality. There clings to our minds a certain presage of future ages, and this both exists most firmly and appears most clearly in men of the loftiest genius and greatest souls. Take away this, and who would be so mad as to spend his life amidst toils and dangers?" Also, here's where the title of the room comes into play, A Door Too Far. Notice how that final barrier also has a receiver next to it, despite the fact that we would never be able to get a laser around all those bends. So that's another source of red herrings, and more blatant this time. With how particular I needed to be with the placement of that connector, this almost feels like an unintended solution, but looking at the last step, I suppose not. So Cicero's talk of doing mad things for the sake of legacy fits pretty well with the previous log where the scientist is exclaiming how insane the project is. At some level, deep or shallow, one of the reasons he's doing it is so that it will leave a legacy. And it's one of the biggest legacies out there. If we accept that mankind is facing an apocalypse, then their attempts to create an AI are no less than an attempt to propagate the species via machines. So how does that change the substantial speculation we've had so far on the nature of a person? One of the main aspects of the argument is always what will happen to us. If we give rights to machines, will our rights remain the same? Is there a danger of them becoming too powerful? If you remove humanity from the equation, then all of that disappears. We can waiver all of the restrictions and laws we assume we might have to make, and focus on making something as person-like as possible. Just sort of needlessly expressing here how incapable I am of using connectors to open that last gate. The jammer may not be as flashy, but it does the job where others cannot. So I wonder whether creating this AI with far less restrictions than we would otherwise have significantly impacts how we'd go about it. Also, one day I'll solve a puzzle by firing a jammer through from an opposing room. I'm sure of it. So the logs in this game give an idealised scenario of what we do in that situation. That's why it's international. We're colliding all of the computational power from as many countries as are able to partake. And as a result, it's taken an overflowing number of years to do. When this whole simulation started, as evidenced by that one message we saw from Aversion 0, completely losing its mind, it just wasn't ready. So if Elohim and Milton are the AIs that have come out of the experiment, they weren't put there by people. In this game, it seems, the singularity happened in mankind's absence. This puzzle is wonderful. It's small and neat, and it shows off exactly why these lasers are so fun to use. It doesn't take long, so I'll just let it unfold. There you have it. It's basically a deadlock, but with a positive result. The blue laser's keeping the barrier open for the red laser, and the red laser's keeping the barrier open for the blue laser. Finally, since I disentangled this connector, I can use it to press down pressure plates just as well as anything else. The third text file is a fun read about chatbots. It gets its point across really effectively. It's at 107 if you haven't already read it. As far as I can tell, the file doesn't have any context. I don't know whether the discussion is between people who are on the project. And again it blurs the line. What's the difference between artificial sentience and a program with a really sophisticated set of responses? I found a wild box. Please bear with me while I have some fun with it. Alexandra was talking last episode about curiosity, the desire to learn, not the rover. And it's a pretty helpful, if vague, line to draw when determining the chatbot's sentience. The program firstly has to be intended for a specific situation, and then when put somewhere without any appreciable goal, see whether it tries to spin a goal out of nothing. Our perceptions might get in the way. It may not have a goal in mind, but look like it through moving arbitrarily. And again, this is only for a sentience very similar to ours, but it's a start. All I can imagine is that we'd know it when we saw it. I'll eventually get over there. It takes some effort to find a box and not immediately run off to try and find a use for it. you're coming with me. The first log file was Stratton again, talking about the Talos Principle in a bit more detail. Also, I saw the low wall over there, but my impulse control was feeling pretty strong. Also, this room here, before I start, it's called Deception. That word really got into my head, and this whole thing takes about 7 minutes. A one-off or a sign of things to come? You decide. The main problem I had with it was, well, remember on the last puzzle I set up a connector just by the purple barrier with a blue laser? Well, I could see instantly that I could use that to solve this puzzle. If you look where the sigil is, it's just got a blue receiver, right by the entrance. So knowing that I could complete it at any time while trying to solve it legitimately was, well, that sounds like a good basis for an experiment. You'd have to get some really bored lab rats who could either push a button to get food or complete a maze to get food, and pit them against rats who have no choice but to complete the maze. Could someone get on that? Please and thank you. The word deception as well, I had no idea what it referred to. These steps, maybe? They're kinda hard to see from certain angles. So what confounded philosophers about the Talos Principle is apparently its simplicity and unassailability that cut through their rhetoric. I can understand that. A simple answer always seems less worthwhile. I mean, it's less weighty, there's less to think about. There's a certain, oh, is that it? Even in the realms of a mathematical proof. The phrase the principle translates to is, even the most faithful philosopher cannot live without his blood. I think the word faithful there is referring to faith, that the meaning of life is attainable, that questions do have answers. It's a bit of a slap in the face. However deeply you think, you're on exactly the same level as everybody else. The fact that we're so dependent on our physical selves answers a lot of questions, but the answer raises infinitely more questions. Putting that connector up the stairs felt kind of arbitrary, and with these stairs as well, the word deception was just strobe lighting the back of my skull. Especially since I can't make this connection when I have both connectors on top of their platforms. That was pretty marvellous. The blue light was taking priority, maybe because it was closer, or maybe because it was the last thing I connected to, and it was interrupting a connector through a barrier that was keeping that barrier open, so every time the barrier closed it just reopened again. And now the game is really insistent that I'm probably trapped and should reset, but as soon as I open the next barrier that message will disappear. So now my thoughts were I could disentangle these red lasers somehow, because they were using a lot of resources to make it all the way over here. If I could just remove one of these connectors, I'd have it sussed, but then that's not anywhere near deceptive enough. So while I faff about with that, let's look at the second log. How nice it's one of Arcadie's journal entries, the man behind the archive. Apparently the project has got contributors from every country on Earth, which... wow. Is that likely? It also sounds like too many cooks. It's not the whole project, just the archive, so it's information relevant to humanity that's all going in there. You'd have thought you'd end up with countries pushing agendas, fighting for space. And maybe so, but maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe it all gets to go in. As he says, they're going to take contributions while network connections last. If humans aren't going to be around, it doesn't make sense that a human should determine what goes in and what stays out. Leave that up to the archive program, whatever it is. Which in this case is probably Milton. Two AIs that developed independently and with different purposes, fighting for our robotic souls. This wall is also deceptive. I've seen rooms like this before where the trick was to fire a laser around behind and one in front. I was pretty sure at this point that I knew what the actual intended deception was, but testing that theory would require me to replace all of my connectors, and I just didn't feel like it. Decided to get all other avenues of inquiry completely shut down before moving on. The last log we've seen then is again almost entirely devoid of context. 12 comments on a post, an article presumably about the apocalypse. It's a nice play on that whole troll commentator first thing. one of the final comments is, "The internet's working less and less now. Goodbye all." And the person who said first then finishes the comments section with "last." Hey there, I'm still stuck on this mess. So the commentary up until this point was recorded a few days ago, and it stopped at the point at which I succumbed to my cold. You could probably hear. So pretty much a previous version of myself couldn't cut it any longer, and now I'm here to carry on where it left off. Someone did kindly point out that message that I supposedly left but didn't remember leaving, about meeting the edge of the world, well, the version number under my name was different from the one that I go by when I write messages. Which probably implies that every time I see the rewind function, I've failed, my process comes to an end, and another version almost exactly the same comes along, except it doesn't fall off the cliff or wander into the poorly textured abyss, or get stuck in a place it was never meant to be. That means that the button on my hand that controls my rewind function is more like a self-destruct button. Should I be worried about that, considering my mind doesn't change, and I'm a robot to begin with? At the least it makes me feel like I've had to endure a lot of extra effort. Oh nice, so here's where I worked it out. The deception in the title of the room refers to the path I was trying to make my blue laser go down. All I have to do is double it back on itself, which saves me from having to extend the red laser quite as far. I don't have anything to say about the logs for now, so I'd like to take a moment to talk about how great the puzzle design is becoming, and how it wouldn't work in any other medium. If you try plotting these chambers out from a top-down 2D perspective, it wouldn't be too bad, especially with just the jammers, but distinguishing between walls and windows would be a challenge. A crucial part of these puzzles is having an avatar who moves around the environment and relocates the components. The first-person perspective might not seem all that necessary, but it would be a nightmare to get the same sort of feel from an analog stick shooter or something. And then the rest of it, laser elevation and such, you'd have no chance. I think it's worth pointing out because, at least to me, when playing these puzzles, it feels almost as if I could be doing exactly the same thing on a phone. And I didn't need to use the other set of stairs, so there were 2 deceptions in this puzzle, which in itself is a deception. I couldn't help but show off what I almost resorted to 5 minutes in. I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. When they put these rooms across from each other, they knew what could happen. Being able to break the game here and there feels like part of the fun, but it takes some guts to put things like this in intentionally. This video could have been under 20 minutes. I wasn't the only one who was ill. My computer struggled a few times during this, so if you see any dissolve cuts, they were only a few seconds apart. And now we can use this box. With the practice I'd had, I didn't think twice about trying to scale this wall. And they gave me another box. Those maniacs, don't they know what I can do with 2 boxes? So that first log is really odd considering what we've looked at so far. An extensive collection of philosophical works on the wrong subsystem. Also, I finally showed this off. We've got a fair idea now that someone, probably Milton, is controlling our access to the archives. I just had a thought. It would be really neat if it was someone else, or if it was all coincidental, and we've just been projecting what we read onto our current situation. Pretending otherwise, considering we've been fed scraps of philosophical material, it feels like the limitations of our knowledge is being rubbed in our face. It makes us feel helpless. Makes us question why we've been told as much as we have, just like I did just then. It prevents us from having any context, which would normally be a death knell in a story, as keeping the audience in the dark for a plot contrivance has to be done for an extremely good reason. But here the stuff we're missing context in is the real world. So since the world is out there, all this information is available to me, I don't feel like I'm being shortchanged. Of course, most philosophical works are available to me, and I haven't read them. And if they were in this game, Well, actually, I'd probably read them, because I prefer doing anything as part of a greater whole. Then again, maybe my robot brain could absorb it within seconds, which I choose not to believe because that distances myself from this avatar. Also, that was close. Sounded close. This puzzle is taking us back to basics. Mines, jammers and keys, whether it's to remind us of how far we've come in so short a time, or just to show that they haven't forgotten about this aspect amongst all the new technology. It's a nice homely feeling taking a step back, allows you to take stock. On a game analysis side of things, it's probably intended to remind us of these mechanics, so that when they smush them together with the lasers more, we don't just drop all our toys in a heap. The 8th text file from this hub is another progress report, this time from Alexandra. They're going to use a game engine for the simulation. It makes sense for the stability, how modular, iterative and easy to use it is. Hopefully there are people on the project with game design degrees they never thought they'd use. In any case, it's a lovely little lampshade. I'm sure you can guess, but the secret text in that file says, "We've decided to use the Sirius Engine 7.5, which Crow Team have kindly made available to us." That beep is just the previous computer, it threw me off. And we're already getting sigils for Door C. We haven't even been to B yet. As I mentioned before, my locational awareness is appalling. If you'd have told me that turning right out of the exit would have led to the computer, I might have believed you. I've got a plan for that actually. I'm going to start memorising the entrances to various roads. Treat every single one of them like a landmark. Maybe then I'll be able to find my way around. Milton's back to being coy. I think that's because I did things out of order by going up top first. Out of 5, I can choose to say very poor, very good, or reasonable. If I take them as 1, 3 and 5, that's almost exactly how I answer these things normally. But really, my options are ridiculous, and I'm going to respond in kind. That took a turn. I think I've established now that personhood matters, even if the definition is anyone's guess. Okay, it's not the end of the world because I'm still here. It's not a theme park because I'm not disappointed. Saying a dream or hell would be facetious. I'm fairly sure it's quite a sane mad experiment, and anywhere sounds unuseful. You know, I am quite facetious, and I haven't done enough of it. Oh geez, I don't know what's real, I don't know who exists, I certainly don't know what century it is. I hadn't thought about not being on Earth. I want to think about it. It would be entirely baseless. And I may have learnt that this was wrong and shunted it out of my mind. Milton has a fair point. And geez, I've thought about this so much over the past few weeks I can't give a single answer. Talk about making presumptions, Milton. Though we did say that the problem with people is that you're all convinced you're people from the inside. So it looks like we're all having difficulties keeping our story straight. Or at least our pronouns. I feel continually assailed. In fact, there's only one place I can go unobserved and collect my thoughts. I'm going to go there next time and open door 1.